Well, welcome to this evening's ECHA talk. I hope you're all well. We'll be starting shortly, as it's just about half past, just slightly after 7:30 now. Our guest speaker this evening is Dr. John Jenkins of the University of York. He's going to talk to us on a National Repository of Saints, the Relic Collection of Westminster Cathedral from 1895. So it's a particular interest of Dr. Jenkins. So I'd just like to welcome everybody this evening, and the talk has been recorded, so it will be on YouTube in due course within a few days, I think. If you have questions, if you'd like to put them into the Q&A box, the chat box that is, in which you'll find if you click on it, it should open up. And yes, that's it, chat box, I've just seen it there. So if you have any questions, if you'd like to put any questions into that box, and then we'll go through some questions at the end. I'm sure there will be some questions. It'll be an excellent talk, I'm quite sure. So I'll introduce Dr. Jenkins. So he has a particular interest in pilgrimage, particularly. He's director of the Centre for Pilgrimage Studies at York University, and he's got an interest in Canterbury, for example, various pilgrimage places, has lots of publications. I won't read them all out, but he's a great expert on pilgrimage and medieval church, I'm sure, as well. So I'm sure you can look up his publications online if you'd like. So very welcome, Dr. Jenkins, this evening.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me to talk as well. I'm going to, I said I was allowed to plug my book at the start, so I will. I've got a book out called The Customary of the Shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury Cathedral. It's a Latin, side-by-side Latin-English translation of a document relating to the Shrine of Thomas Becket from 1428, an operating manual to the shrine. It's just come out in paperback, but even better, it's available free to read on the internet. It's an open access book. So if you just type in John Jenkins, Customary of the Shrine, or Customary of the Shrine of Becket, you can download it, and it's a sort of whip through of how shrines operate in the Middle Ages. So do enjoy that if you like that sort of thing. So yes, I am a medievalist, but I'm sojourning in the world of modern Catholic relics. As a result of a project that I did between 2014 and 2017, I got very involved with Westminster Cathedral, and particularly I've written a few things on Westminster Cathedral as well, a couple of articles. But one of the things that has continued to interest me, I mean, I love Westminster Cathedral as a place. I think it's an absolutely beautiful building, incredible. Every time I go down to London, I go down there, I go in, and it is one of my favourite places just to be. But I've been fascinated by their relic collection, because very few people seem to talk about modern relic collections, or modern in the sense of the 19th, 20th centuries. There's plenty written on medieval relic collections and some on early modern relic collections. But after the 19th century, academics, historians tend to lose interest. But there is a very interesting story to tell. And I'm going to try and explain at least 50 years of this story through the lens of Westminster Cathedral. It's got one of the largest collections of relics in England, especially now so many of the seminaries have closed down. I think Stonyhurst would rival it, but they do have a huge, thousands upon thousands of relics. They range from the whole body of a saint, St. John Southworth, to high-end relics in the treasury, to the many, many relics stored in the crypt. And at the top, I just want to say my great thanks are due to Miriam Power, the cathedral archivist, who's helped me immensely over the years. Paul Moynihan, the MC, the cathedral, who showed me around recently and allowed me to take some of the pictures you're going to see, as well as all the canons, the clergy, the staff and volunteers, the Guild of St. John Southworth, who have been really helpful to me over the years and make the cathedral such a special place. Now, relics have been a part of the Christian faith almost since the beginning. They've traditionally been seen as retaining some of the power and charisma of the saint, as a place where heaven and earth might touch. as well as being a focal point, which leads to reflection and to prayer. A place where you can call for the intercession of the saint as well, where that intercession works more powerfully around something that was associated with them in life, or indeed was their body. They certainly seem, relics, to have an ineffable aura, and this is something I'll come on to discuss. If I were a theologian or a canonist, I might begin by delineating the different classes of relics. First-class relics, which are the literal remains, reliquae, things left behind. Second-class relics are things that are associated with saints during their lives, and third-class relics are things that are sanctified by contact with a relic. If I were an osteologist, I might start by thinking about how we can authenticate relics. Should we date the bones? Should we carbon date them, DNA test them, or work out which bit of the skeleton they come from? How do we think about what these things are? They are, at one at the same time, devotional objects. They are human remains a lot of the time, but they are also they are art historical objects, and they're also what we call material culture objects that speak to history in their own right. Some of the earliest relics to be collected were things like this in the picture, which it comes from one of Westminster Cathedral's relic stores. I would guess from the handwriting that this is late 18th, early 19th century, but it's hard to tell. It is a box. You can see in the left-hand side what's written on the inside lid, that these are stones from the Holy Land. These are stones from the houses of notable figures from the Bible. And then on the right, you can see those little compartments and then a guide to where the stones are from. So from the house of Rachel, from the house of Mary Magdalene, from the house of David, and so on and so on. Someone has been to the Holy Land, collected the stones from the Holy Land and saved them as a souvenir. And these are second-class relics. And these were some of the earliest relics to be collected and continue to be collected up until the present day, basically. But these were obviously taken 18th, 19th century. No idea how they got into Westminster Cathedral's relic collection, a refrain you'll be hearing quite a lot, I think, because these things just turn up. They have no documentation. We just have the items themselves. We can, so thinking about the way in which you have categories of relics, first, second, third class relics, thinking about relics as categorizable as human or animal or real and fake. These are formal ways of categorizing relics, but as a historian, I'm more interested in how people have related to relics, how they've used them. I'm only really tangentially interested in what the relics are. I'm mainly interested in what relics do and what they've done in the past. And we can believe that relics have intrinsic power whilst also understanding that ritual and popular devotion, the stories we tell around a relic, activate a relic and imbue it with meaning for ourselves and for the society around us. As with the stories of the saints themselves, the meaning of relics is constantly being adjusted to make them relevant in the world in which they exist, whilst also offering a link in which one French sociologist, Daniel Hervier-Lejeune, called the chain of memory, which connects us to the past and stretches from contemporary Christian worship back to the Bible. And these relics are points on that chain of memory. They help us remember that history. Relics have come in and out of fashion in line with trends in Christian devotion and theology. Relics themselves have been seen at times by the church as potentially dangerous or subversive, as something which needs to be controlled. There's always the fear of a chancer like Chaucer's pardoner from the Canterbury Tales selling fake relics, pig's knuckles, because one bit of bone looks very much like another bit of bone. There's always the lingering question of how do you establish authenticity. The novel The Leopard by Giuseppe de Lampedusa, if you've not read it, I highly recommend it, captures some of the fluctuations in 19th and early 20th century Italy towards relics. In this, the Cellini sisters spent most of the late 19th century acquiring a large private relic collection from various sources, only for an efficient young priest from the Vatican offices to turn up in the very last chapter of the book and declare in 1910 that only 5 of them are genuine and the other 70 odd are fake. it's not such of a plot point that I've ruined the rest of the book. That, by the way, you can still enjoy. It's not too much of a spoiler. But this idea that in 1910 the Vatican were sending out people to check over large private relic collections and declaring that quite a lot of them were really only fit for the dustbin, whereas in the 19th century was a much more unguarded approach to relic collecting. The 20th century, I'd say, saw a much more judicious, cautious, and probably more sensible approach to the use of relics. Throughout the 20th century, the church's position has been increasingly to control what people do with relics and how they circulate, building up to a 1994 proclamation that churches were no longer to give relics to private individuals. And from that point on, the only relics that can be disseminated have to be in the hands of church institutions. The final tightening of the restrictions. Relics themselves have to be authenticated by a bishop or other papally authorized cleric. They're bound with red silk and sealed in a reliquary with an official personal seal on red wax. If, as sometimes happens, the silk is eaten away by insects or poor storage conditions, or if the seal breaks for whatever reason, the relic needs to be re-authenticated in the same way. This does actually make it technically possible to closely date quite a lot of reliquaries because the personal seal of the bishop will be identifiable. In practice, though, the multitude of bishops, the difficulty of getting the database of seal impressions of all of these bishops and titular bishops and suffragan bishops makes this an incredibly daunting task, which I've not even begun to attempt. So again, there'll be a lot of this looks like it could be possibly 19th century, rather than me saying, oh, this is definitely from this period. As there is an entire panoply of saints, so each saint will potentially have an almost infinite supply of relics, given the ability of relics to reproduce themselves as contact relics through touch. As the saints each perform their various functions or offer their protection to the particular devotees, they can also do so through the physical presence of the relics. The presence of the relic effectively focuses devotion and embodies the saint, making them physically present when they're being called upon. Relics can be brought out on saints' feast days for this purpose. They're also needed in the dedication of altars, which have the relics sealed into them. I was very privileged to be at St Chad's Cathedral, Birmingham, to see the dedication of an altar to St Chad 2 years ago, in which a relic of Blessed Dominic Barberi was placed, who administered in the area and been custodian of St Chad's relics at Oscott in the 19th century. And that's one thing that's a repeated theme in this. The choice of relics is always highly significant. Most Catholic churches in England will have, or at least at one time had, their own probably quite small store of relics for liturgical and devotional use. But the natural repositories of relics, the great stores, were the seminaries and cathedrals, Ushaw, Oscott, Ware, Stonyhurst, and the great cathedral. Westminster Cathedral had amassed a very large collection of relics by the time of its dedication in 1910. They're currently actually in the process of being catalogued, and a lot of them being tested for authenticity as well, in terms of that they are the correct human bone material, by a team at Liverpool. I don't actually know how many relics Westminster has. I don't think Westminster, I'm pretty sure Westminster don't know how many relics they have. But they're trying to find out, at least. And there has been a process of rationalization at various points. Sometimes reliquaries just get broken beyond repair. Sometimes relics crumble to dust because they're in poor conditions. There's not much you can do about it, really. Just offer it up, essentially. But in terms of the individual relics, pieces of saint, there must, at the height of their relic collection, have been thousands upon thousands, of which at least thousands still remain. In the left-hand picture there alone, that sort of basilica-looking thing, there are 365 individual relics, one for each day of the year. This is one of Westminster's sort of statement reliquaries. There's not one for 29th of February because St August Chapdelaine, who's the only saint that I know that has a feast day on the 29th of February, wasn't canonized until 2000. And this looks to be early 19th century, probably. Westminster has a wide range of relics in a wide range of reliquaries suitable for all occasions. And here we see some of their showpiece, their finest examples, designed to be placed on an altar and visible as a monstrance in the top right hand there. You can see them from a long way around. The relic itself, the piece of bone, tiny, 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 almost invisible in some of these, millimeters across. The monstrance, the reliquary, designed to project the inner power of the reliquary, to show the glory of the relic, even if the relic itself is rather unprepossessing. And that's why the reliquaries are key to the whole story, the whole presentation of the relic. Below on the right hand side, some smaller, more personal relics here, what we all call takers, have been mounted for display in one of the cathedral's 4 reliquary cupboards in the crypt, which have recently been sorted and cleaned and had their internal doors taken off so they can breathe a bit, which is all excellent work in terms of the conservation that's going on there. Some of the relics can be fairly securely dated. Here's a nice little cardboard box, addressed to the Right Reverend Dr. John Douglas, Vicar Apostolic of London between 1790 and 1812, at his house, Castle Street, Holborn. Although it looks sealed on the top, the cord is actually broken, long since snapped, so it would need re-authenticating. This is not currently an authentic relic, and so I was able to have a look inside, and this is in one of the relic cupboards at Westminster. There are 3 paper parcels containing fragments of bone. I only had a peek inside one of them, and it told me that these were fragments of bone from the Apostle of France, St. Denis. Literally, the Apostle of France, St. Denis, and his companions. Store of relics prior to the opening of Westminster Cathedral in the 1900s, and even as late as 1905, the head of the community of oblates at St. Mary of the Angels, Bayswater, was complaining that their church was effectively the first port of call for anyone in the Diocese of Westminster wishing to consecrate an altar. So this relic of St. Denis and the other 2 relics, unknown, because I didn't want to look at them, these wouldn't necessarily have passed from Douglas to his successors as Vicar Apostolics through to the Archbishops of Westminster. Its journey to the cathedral is very unclear, who ended up with Douglas's relic collection. It's just not entirely clear. These passed through private hands of Catholic families. This is before the restoration of the hierarchy. We're in the middle of Catholic emancipation. Very unclear how these were passed around. The nature of the relics is very interesting, though, and these are in Westminster's store, as they say. It seems more than mere chance that around the time of Catholic emancipation, the Vicar Apostolic was acquiring relics of the Apostle of France. Quite 6, when Napoleon was overturning the secularism of the French Revolution through the promotion of St. Denis as a national saint in France. And again, there's that idea that the relics are very often carefully chosen to fit the role they have to play. The relics have been acquired since the cathedral opened, including perhaps the largest first-class relic in England, the only on display whole body of a saint in the country, St. John Southworth, who came to the cathedral in 1930, and I'll have a lot to say about him later. The story of the relic is, as I said, in large part told by the reliquary. By its size, shape, design, ornamentation, it defines the relic. Some are out of reach, some are designed to be touched. A small piece of head or arm bone, for example, is difficult to understand on its own, but placed in a head or arm-shaped reliquary, it has a much clearer meaning. And in the medieval period, it was very common. You'd put a relic in an arm-shaped reliquary, and then you would use an arm relic, and you would use it to bless the crowds. It would be shaped in the form of benediction. But there's more to the relic than just the art of the reliquary. It's the more intangible stories around the relics that matter as well, stories that are retold as circumstances change. An excellent example of this is the arrival of the Hungarian Esztergom relic of St. Thomas Becket at the cathedral on the 23rd of May 2016. And some of you may have seen it on its tour around the country, together with the Becket relics from St. Magnus the Martyr London, St. Thomas's Fulham, St. Thomas's Canterbury, Stonyhurst, and the cathedral's own relic. There they all are on the high altar at Westminster Cathedral. I don't actually know exactly which all of them are. The Esztergom relic is the one in the middle, in that modern sort of monstrance reliquary, and immediately to its left, in that small sort of pinnacled architectural gabled reliquary. That's the Westminster Cathedral's own relic of St Thomas Becket. It was a major and momentous occasion, the returning of the Hungarian relic to England for the first time since 1220. And for many people, this was an extremely spiritual occasion. But it was also a highly political occasion, as the then president of Hungary, János Éder, accompanied the relics on a trip attempting to strengthen ties with David Cameron's Conservatives over key issues arising in the European Parliament. In this context, the Becket relic, as well as being a powerful devotional and spiritual object, served as a physical reminder of the centuries-old link between the two countries in the shape of a saint who stood up to, as the Hungarians and most of the Conservatives might have tended to see it at the time, the overbearing authority, in this case, Henry II, perhaps being recast as the EU. I don't think I'm overstretching it. The Westminster Cathedral relic of Thomas Becket. I love this photo. I took this in Lent about 7 or 8 years ago. That little architectural reliquary is inside another bigger gabled architectural reliquary, and it is standing on the chantry altar of Cardinal Vaughan in the cathedral, which is behind a metal grill. Pretty much everything in the cathedral had been veiled. Obviously, during Lent, but this had not been veiled, this reliquary on this altar. And there was what looks like, I think it was 60p someone had chucked through the bars at the only thing in the cathedral that they could see that wasn't veiled. You know, if you have it on display, people will offer to it, apparently, but there we go. So this is in Cardinal Vaughan's chantry, and actually we have a very interesting story. And this is why I go back to my we kick off with my main theme of the 1895 to 1945, the acquisition of this relic by Cardinal Vaughan, who was looking for relics for his new cathedral. And there was a story in the Venerabile magazine in the 30s, someone reminiscing about when Cardinal Vaughan had come over. And he'd gone to the Cathedral of Veroli in Italy, in central Italy, and seen a little piece of St Thomas Becket's skull in the cathedral, about a little over an inch in all dimensions, which is what this little piece actually here is. Oddly, little over an inch in all dimensions. The then Archbishop Vaughan, he was over there to get his cardinal's hat, heard of this relic, and when he was in Italy, he went over to Veroli and asked the canons there whether he could have some time to venerate the relic. Now, fast forward, another group of English people, monks, turn up, and they say, "Oh, we hear you've got this bit of Thomas Becket. May we see it?" And the canons of the cathedral said, "Well, we used to, but it disappeared." So Cardinal Vaughan had taken it back home, basically. A bit of what in the medieval period we call furta sacra. But this is quite common in the acquisition of relics. There wasn't seen anything particularly bad about liberating what you thought was a relic in the wrong place and putting it in the right place. The 19th century was a bit of a free-for-all for that, as was the medieval period. So I've talked a little about relics in general and brought up a few of the relics in the cathedral's collection, and I want to spend the remainder of the paper in a sort of chronological outline of the role relics played in the cathedral's history between its foundation and the end of World War II. Although the Diocese of Westminster had been founded in 1850, it wasn't until 1894 that under Cardinal Vaughan, plans were seriously afoot for building a cathedral. Vaughan had a vision of mission, of returning England to the Catholic faith, and he wanted a cathedral to reflect that. He wanted a cathedral, in fact, which looked like the first cathedral built in England, in Canterbury, by St Augustine's mission in 597, a basilican church based on Old St Peter's in Rome. This idea of looking to history to inspire the mission of the future, effectively, he's the new St Augustine, Cardinal Vaughan saw himself slightly as, and this was going to be the re-Catholicization of Rome in the way that St Augustine had re-Christianized England, re-Catholicization of England, rather. And this really inspired, this mission of history really inspired Cardinal Vaughan. Now, you might be thinking Westminster Cathedral doesn't look anything like 4th century Roman basilica, so what's gone on there? Well, that's because the architect Francis Bentley went to Italy, looked at a lot of 4th and 5th century basilicas and found them totally uninspiring and refused to draw one up. He did, however, absolutely love Hagia Sophia. Now, if you're thinking it doesn't actually look much like Hagia Sophia either, you're right. That's because Francis Bentley never saw Hagia Sophia. He read about it in a book. And in fact, the book was written by an architect who himself had only seen Hagia Sophia once, disguised as and veiled as a woman, going on a guided tour. So this is the Chinese whispers of a cathedral design. Basically, it's meant to look like Hagia Sophia, and it looks like Westminster Cathedral. I think it's a beautiful building. I think it's settled into itself quite gracefully. Cardinal Vaughan was getting quite old and sick by the point Francis Bentley came back with his new designs, and he was able to see that the attraction of the design was that you could build the shell of the cathedral very quickly and also quite cheaply, because the decorative elements, the internal decoration, were mosaic, and you could just put them on as funds allowed later on, which indeed the cathedral has been doing ever since and continues to do. Although, I mean, whether it is actually architecturally, physically feasible to ever complete that, I don't know, but I won't. Maybe one day they'll do the domes. Even if the cathedral didn't look very English, Cardinal Vaughan used relics to emphasise the Englishness of this endeavour. The cathedral was effectively a reliquary to medieval British saints. The dedication of the chapels, unusually even for English Catholic cathedrals, included no continental saints, little room for the newly beatified English martyrs. Instead, beside the standard dedications, Holy Family, Our Lady, Holy Souls, St. Michael and St. Peter and Paul, the dedications reflected a cathedral for Britain. St. Gregory and Augustine, the original mission, St. George and the English martyrs, St. Andrew and the Saints of Scotland, St. Patrick and the Saints of Ireland, and the Archbishops of Canterbury, St. Thomas Becket and St. Edmund of Abingdon. St. David didn't get represented in the cathedral until a couple of decades ago, or even last decade, possibly. The relics encased in the high altar were also of St. Thomas Becket and St. Edmund of Abingdon, both Archbishops of Canterbury, along with St. William, Archbishop of York, and the 7th century British missionary St. Boniface, combining the two ancient archdioceses of England, Canterbury and York, with the conversion and Catholic restoration narrative of St. Boniface. Very carefully chosen relics. Major relics of many of these saints were obtained, are placed in matching reliquaries like this one on the left and carried in procession. You can just about make it out in that very grainy photo of the consecration of the cathedral from 1910. Carried in procession at the consecration. Some of them, such as this one of St. Edmund of Abingdon, St. Edmund Rich, are still on display in the cathedral. This one's in the crypt. Also, other relics in the tower, that big bell tower, the Campanile. At the top of that, in the cross, still there, the tower is a full and very deliberate 50 foot higher than the Tower of Westminster Abbey. And in it is a piece of the true cross. As the tower at the time was visible from all over London, the true cross cast its blessings over the entire city. Now, of course, it's hedged in by skyscrapers and you can barely see out, let alone in, sadly. The relics were not just of saints, but of the medieval great churches that Westminster sought to replicate and indeed to integrate within itself. In 1902, Cardinal Vaughan wrote to his secretary saying that he had a basket of stones from old cathedrals and abbey churches, although he had yet to acquire stones from Canterbury, Hereford and Westminster Abbey. He gave instructions to write and ask for samples of the stonework from each. And with them, his secretary was to take a hammer and divide each of the stones into 3 pieces and cement them into the grouting of the high altar, the grouting of the Blessed Sacrament altar, and another into the Lady altar. Larger stones, what he called finials, etc., should be kept whole and arranged near the Lady altar as to be visible to anyone looking at the Lady altar. So the fabric of the medieval great churches of England was to be physically incorporated into the main altars of the new Metropolitan Cathedral at Westminster, enshrining that built heritage of England's religious past as altar relics, effectively. Whether the larger stones were actually arrayed in the Lady Chapel is unclear. They're not there now. They probably were cleared out in 1908 when the chapel was marble clad after Cardinal Vaughan's death in 1903. Cardinal Vaughan also wanted relics befitting the image of a truly medieval English cathedral, or the inheritor of that medieval cathedral tradition. From at least the 16th century, the Basilica of Saint-Sernin in Toulouse had laid claim to the body of St. Edmund the Martyr, 9th century English king, supposedly carried there from the Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds by French soldiers in 1217. Cardinal Vaughan heard of these relics, and these supposedly Anglo-Saxon relics. He desired them for his new cathedral. St. Edmund was an ideal saint for this vision, full foil to Westminster Abbey's ownership of Edward the Confessor, St. Edward the Confessor. Installed at the very heart of the cathedral, behind the high altar, a royal and martyred exemplar from unassailably English Christian heritage. St. Edmund could provide that continuity from the medieval to the recreated Roman Church of England. It all seemed to fit into place. In 1901, he managed to have the relics of St. Edmund secreted out of Toulouse to Rome and then to Arundel Castle, the seat of the Roman Catholic Duke of Norfolk, awaiting the creation of a shrine in the cathedral. But controversy had already attached itself to the relics. A series of letters in the Times, notably by the medievalist and ghost story writer M.R. James, argued strongly against the identification of the Toulouse relics with the Saxon king, and Cardinal Vaughan, dismayed by the reaction, but apparently helpless in the face of such overwhelming historical authority, relinquished his claims and the relics went back to Toulouse. Poor old Cardinal Vaughan, I feel quite sorry for him sometimes. He was to be frustrated in a few more of his attempts to revive medieval Catholicism in the heart of London, not least in his wish to have the cathedral staffed by Benedictine monks, like medieval Canterbury had been, a move which everybody, including the Benedictines, thoroughly rejected as being even vaguely workable. I'd have loved to have seen what would have happened, really. But it wasn't a failure. Westminster's extensive relic collections, many accumulated by Cardinal Vaughan himself, by his brothers, as well as through soliciting donations and acquisitions from other interested and well-travelled clergy, showed in very tangible terms its success in establishing itself as a national church for the Catholic community. That the cathedral was a natural home for a national repository of relics is shown very clearly by an incident around the cathedral's consecration in 1910. The convert Charles Cooksey, a resident of Durham, sent to Westminster his relic of the Anglo-Saxon coffin of St. Cuthbert, presumably acquired at the excavation of that saint's grave in Durham Cathedral in 1899. Westminster, he wrote, would have the proper keeping of it. It's still there. I haven't got a picture of it because I couldn't find it last time, but it is still there in the relic cupboards, in a little cardboard pillbox from pharmacists in Torquay, which I'm from Torquay, so I have a real connection to that, wrapped in some cotton wool, and it is a genuine piece of the coffin of St. Cuthbert. As I've seen the original, and I've seen that, and it is definitely a piece of the coffin of St. Cuthbert, and it is in Westminster Cathedral's relic collection. Clearly, at least some of the laity had accepted the role of the cathedral as a custodian of the Catholic history of Britain, with roots traversing the rupture of the Reformation. Now, noticeably absent from the cathedral were some of the more popular continental saints, Therese of Lisieux, St. Therese of Lisieux, incredibly popular among the Catholic working classes in the early 20th century, not marked at Westminster until a mosaic was installed to her in 1950. The martyrs were similarly largely absent, sharing the name of a chapel with St. George, which itself had become a war memorial after the First World War. But even by the mid-1920s, there were complaints that it was looking a bit shabby and neglected. One problem, as the cathedral administrator noted, when asked for the relics of some of the English martyrs for an altar, was actually there aren't that many surviving relics of English martyrs. There's St. Margaret Clitheroe's hand in York. There's Blessed Edward Oldcorn's eye in Stonyhurst, and a truly unforgettable spectacle for anyone that has seen that. Give me the heebie-jeebies even now. And not much else. And preserved hands and less well-preserved eyes are quite difficult to share out as altar relics. So in 1926, when French workmen discovered on the site of the former Catholic school of Douai the body of the 17th century martyr John Southworth, the then Archbishop Cardinal Vaughan quickly moved to claim him for Westminster, certainly after he was beatified with the other martyrs of England and Wales in 1929. Southworth had been a ministering priest in the Westminster area during the plagues of 1630 to 50. He was arrested many times until finally being hung, drawn and quartered on the 28th of June 1654 for continuing to carry out his cure of souls. He had the potential local appeal that was a driving force behind a number of the other martyrs' cults, and was promoted within the cathedral from the start as the parish priest of Westminster. The date of his martyrdom, June the 28th, was seen as particularly significant. It was the eve of the feast of St. Peter and Paul, and it was the exact date of the consecration of the cathedral in 1910. His feast would coincide with that of the cathedral's feast, with the patron saints of both Rome and medieval London, St. Peter and St. Paul, following the next day. Tying the cause of the martyrs to both the refounded church and to unity with Rome. It's also notable that a particular ecumenical movement of the times, what are known as the Malines conversations between branches of the Catholic and Anglican churches over possible reunion, were opposed by many, including Cardinal Vaughan. For Vaughan, the martyrs such as St. John Southworth were the disproof that the imaginary continuity to which some members of the established church lay claim, which is to say that Anglo-Catholics and the Anglican Church, who thought there were largely semantic differences between the two churches and reunion a case of meeting in the middle, were not accounting for the sufferings of the martyrs, which showed their differences all too plainly. In the stitched together body of Blessed John Southworth in the cathedral, they had evidence of the continuous local, regional and national Catholic history from St. Augustine's mission to the restoration of the hierarchy. His body was transferred to a brass and wood ferretry in the chapel of St. George and the English Martyrs on the 1st of May 1930, and that's as it looks now. Originally, now it's in a glass coffin. It's a glass reliquary, large reliquary, effectively. But originally it wasn't. There was a wooden covering. You could only see it through a very thin strip of glass in the side of it. It was completely covered. It was only opened up completely to display in 1954. So originally, and it would be opened on his feast day as well. But originally, it was hidden. And there's a real thing in that. If you have something on display, it loses some of its power, where something that is only on display every now and then feels much more powerful, because you can only see it. It's a special occasion when you do get to see the whole thing. Long has the church known the power of relics often relies on not letting people see, but only to glimpse what's actually inside. Which you can see on the right, complete with a hole where the head would have been, which was where they were using an iron stick to sort of poke around the ground to try and find where the coffin was. And they didn't think they had found it, but they actually had. They'd just poked a big hole through it, which means that when St. John came out, he wasn't quite as incorrupt as he could have been, unfortunately. His lead coffin was left at St. Edmund's College in Ware, which is where his body is rested before coming to the cathedral. But at some point in the last few decades, the cathedral reacquired it. I hear, but I can't confirm it, in exchange for an eagle lectern. With the intention, hopefully someday fulfilled, this will be put on display with the body. I sort of mention it here in the hope that it might make it happen. The translation of Blessed John Southworth to the cathedral, he wasn't canonized until 1970, sparked a short-lived but comparatively vibrant cult, with a constant stream of pilgrims coming to see the body in the first few months. Because he wasn't sane yet, occurred in great numbers both at and away from the cathedral, and were meticulously recorded in the Cathedral Chronicle until 1939. Most of these attested to the mundane needs of working class Londoners, finding jobs and lodgers or lodgings, solving marital problems, helping with minor physical ailments, and accorded with the low-level problem solving that you might expect of the parish priest of Westminster. So we see a mortgage satisfactorily arranged, an unemployed man obtained work, relief from bad boils and swollen glands, some money received, thanksgiving for breakup of home averted, someone allowed to stay on at work, and after a novena to Blessed John Southworth, I was able to get 3 rooms to let to good tenant. Small Depression era problems, effectively. And I put a little pie chart on the right there, just to show the kind of division. Most of them, a lot of them related to healing, but a lot relating to employment. Actually vaguely comparable with the kind of things that were turning up in medieval saints' accounts as well. Relics of Blessed John Southworth, as he was then, were disseminated were disseminated in early May 1930. Ashore College got some, as did Tyburn Convent, convent, whose superior, there is the reliquary at Tyburn Convent, which includes a skin relic of St. John Southworth, that big L-shaped or J-shaped rather scrap of skin at the bottom. The superior of Tyburn Convent sent a letter to Cardinal Vaughan saying, "So many thanks, Your Eminence, for the precious relic of our glorious martyr, Blessed John Southworth, which Monsignor Collings brought us yesterday." The Prioress of Our Lady of Good Counsel in Haywards Heath wrote to Cardinal Vaughan saying, "Thank you for sending such lovely big pieces of flesh and bone, intended for that house and the mother house in Bruges." Letters asking for relics came from the headmaster of Cardinal Vaughan's school, the Paul Clares at Woodford Green, Notre Dame de Sion in the priest at Blackburn. There was a request from the church at Salisbury in Lancashire, where St. John had been born, where the priest was attempting to start a pilgrimage centre to him. And the Bishop of Salford sent a letter of recommendation and offered to pay for the reliquary. There's definitely a relic of St. John at Salisbury, but I haven't actually been able to go and see it yet, but it is there. In 1931, Mrs. Phyllis Wood of Myrtle Cottage, Old Cleve, Somerset, wrote to Cardinal Vaughan thanking him for the relic of St. John, which he'd sent her. She'd sent it on to her mother, and they would start the novena on Saturday, after which she would send the relic back immediately. She hoped this would not mean that she was holding on to it for too long. Cardinal Vaughan replied he was very willingly allow her to retain the relic of Blessed John Southworth, trusting that its possession will be the means of spreading still more the devotion to the blessed martyr. So these are going out to private individuals as well. One very intriguing letter on that front that was in the Cathedral archives. I think it's okay because it's not at all clear who sent this. "Dear Mrs. Peyton Walsh, I beg to enclose a relic. The relic is a piece of bone taken from his foot. Now you can pay your respects to him as if you were in the cathedral. Yours sincerely, whoever. Please do not mention the matter to outsiders." The Peyton Walshes were a very respectable Catholic family living in Wimbledon. There's nothing fishy going on here. I have no idea why they would not want to mention the matter to outsiders. I suppose perhaps because every family would want a piece, but that's the idea. If you think the naming's familiar, there's a novelist, Jill Peyton Walsh, who was nominated for the Booker Prize for Knowledge of Angels. She married one of the members of the family, a nephew. So we see then that the cathedral was the repository of relics, but was also actively sending relics out both to institutions and individuals for use in their devotions. And that brings me on to the last part of my talk, a remarkable document for the cathedral that I absolutely must publish something on. This is why I'm doing this talk, really, because I want to build up something to publish on the use of relics in this way. And this remarkable document from the cathedral archives, which shows us what the cathedral was doing with its relics around the time of the Second World War. Drawn up by Father Richard Berry, prefect of the sacristy and custodian of the relics, and it covers the period February 1939 to January 1943. There are 62 entries relating to the creation of reliquaries and the distribution of relics. A lot of them are like this. Some of them quite fairly straightforwardly to do with the cathedral's diocesan business. The sacred portion of the bones of Blessed Charles Lwanga, martyr of Uganda, were transferred from a red-coloured paper parcel, which had been secured with the seal of Reverend Henry Stryker, who was the titular bishop of Thabraka and the vicar apostolic of Uganda at the turn of the 20th century. So these were sent over probably in the about 1900s. In this paper parcel, it's been opened. The relics, the portion has been transferred to an oval metal case, little Thecca, probably, which Reverend Mother Superior of the Little Sister of the Assumption at Notting Hill, London, requested to possess. So they're sending out a little relic to a convent. A sacred portion of the wood of the Most Holy Cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, taken from an oval metal case, again, probably a little one like that, taken a piece out of that, and replaced, or taken the relic out and put in a new oval metal case and sealed by Cardinal Hinsley. And that's been sent out to parish priest Joseph McEntee of North Harrow. And finally, their sacred portions of the bones of St. Boniface and St. Pius placed in an oval metal case, requested by Elsie Appleton for Maurice Van Poole. Appleton and Van Poole were clerical furnishers and jewelers, essentially. They made devotional items. So this is effectively for them to create, presumably, a bespoke reliquary. The ones, the little more odd to our modern eyes. So a sacred portion of the bones of Blessed John Southworth in a silver gilt oval case for Bertha Weeks. There's Anna Peyton Walsh again, getting another piece of John Southworth in an oval silver chest this time. Then the next two are one part and shows how dealing with reliquaries. A sacred portion of the bones of St. Boniface taken from an ornate oval glass case, divided into two. One piece was replaced in the same case and given to the Most Reverend Prior of Parkminster. The other piece was ground into dust and put into a crystal flask and given to the congregation of Our Lady of the Missions. So they're taking relics and then they're grinding up bits of relics to serve other purposes, to put in different reliquaries. So they're treating relics essentially. They're using relics much more proactively than we would think possible now, really. And finally, I think this is very sweet. A sacred portion of the bones of Blessed John Southworth Martyr placed in a round metal case, requested by an unknown blind person, 30th September 1942. They didn't even record who they were giving it to. A blind person came to ask for a miracle or a favour from St. John, and they let him go with a relic. And I've given as an example there these little thakers about that big that you can hold in your hand or wear around your neck, something like that in a base metal. Lastly, and I think this is an astonishing thing, I absolutely love this. These are 5 entries. Sacred portions of the bone of St. Honoratus Martyr and St. Austerius Martyr in 24 paper containers, requested by the Most Reverend James Day, Bishop of Sebastopol. Then more of St. Honoratus and St. Austerius to the Edward Myers, the Bishop of Lammas. And then more Austerius to James Day, again, all in 1939, more St. Honoratus to James Day, all in September 1939. And then finally, sacred portions of St. Patientia and St. Urban going off to James Day, again, 1941, in which he's called the Bishop of the Forces. Now, James Day, Reverend James Day, was Bishop of the Armed Forces, Bishop of the Catholic Armed Forces. And if you're familiar with your 20th century history, the 3rd of September might be familiar to you as the date Britain declared war on Germany. So these are relics going out on the day of the declaration of war. And they are going to, in paper parcels, to be the relics for portable altars. And the 29th of June, 1941, another very important date, it is the opening up of the Italian front. So these are more relics going off to portable altars, but this time for the Italian campaign. And these saints are not chosen at random. St. Honoratus and St. Austerius, it took me so long to find out who these saints were because they are unbelievably obscure, but they're very important. St. Honoratus and St. Austerius were both saints from Belgium. St. Honoratus was a bishop, St. Austerius a martyr. So these are relics going in portable altars to be sent off to the front, and they are relics that match the theatre of war. You're going with the local saints. You have the local saint support. And then the Italian campaign, St. Patientia Martyr, her grave was on the Via Appia in Rome. St. Urban, a pope, again, buried in Rome. You're going off to fight in Italy with Roman saints. You're fighting with Italian saints. You have the local saints on your side. They're really thinking about this. And here actually is an example of the kind of portable altars and an in situ use. I haven't been able to track down any of these portable altars. I'm not even quite sure if anybody knows where I might even begin to look for the sort of army side, the chaplaincy of the forces records on this. I'll be very grateful. I actually do not know even where to begin to look, or if any of these might have possibly survived. But these are examples that aren't from this campaign. I think the one on the left is American. But this is an example of a portable altar, and then a portable altar on the back of a Jeep, basically. So, to conclude, returning at last to the most significant of the cathedral's relics, the presence of a mostly incorrupt saint in the heart of the cathedral, in the heart of the capital of London, the only such holy body to be on display in the entire country. Although even then it attracted the devotions of English Catholics for only so long. Even within the 1930s, the number of miracles swiftly reduced, 120 in the first 5 years, 24 in the subsequent 5 years. From 1940 onwards, references to Blessed John in the in-house Cathedral Chronicle, the confined tellings of his life story in the July edition, reproducing the sermon given in the chapel on the eve of his feast. His reclothing in period dress and the removal of his shrine's wooden cover in 1954, as we see him now, failed to garner much enthusiasm at the time. By the mid-1960s, his feast day had been erroneously switched to the 27th rather than the 28th of July and doesn't appear to have been marked at all. There was no special service on his feast day following his execution in 1970. Instead, it was marked with the other martyrs in November when he was brought out into the nave for the first time. He wasn't brought out into the nave again until 2006 or 2007, when, at the instigation of the now late cathedral administrator, Monsignor Mark Langham, the tradition began that we can see here of bringing St. John to the nave on his feast, and also of associating him with the ordination ceremony. The general devotion of English Catholics to the saints and martyrs is well attested in the mid-20th century, but it's difficult to work out why St. John has struggled to arouse a huge amount of enthusiasm. I think it's rather unfair. As historical models or ideals, they appeal to a sense of self-sacrifice, but perhaps more among the clergy than the laity. It's been argued that their sufferings were perhaps too much for increasingly modern English Catholics to bear, except on the most occasional, or the most sporadic occasions. If we consider Westminster Cathedral as a site for the articulation of a national English Catholicism, it's notable that Cardinal Vaughan wished to place his relics of St. Edmund behind the high altar in pride of place. St. John Southworth is, and always has been, on the fringes, in a side chapel behind a grille. He's a relic that can almost literally be wheeled out on special occasions, but is otherwise safely dormant and often sadly overlooked. And this is the way with relics. They are what you do with them. They need us to create the stories around and put them in the right places and present them correctly. So I want to end on a call then for you all to make an effort, please, to visit, to respect, witness, whether you're Catholic or not, one of the most powerful reminders of the lived experience of the historic Catholic faith in England, St. John Southworth at Westminster Cathedral. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. That was excellent talk, really, and really interesting, actually. I've never thought much about the relics at Westminster Cathedral. I mean, I've seen St. John Southworth, but as is everybody who's ever visited, I'd imagine. But I've never really thought about the sort of repository, if that's the word, of all these relics and so forth. There, I remember going to Downside Abbey many years ago and being asked to see the relics. Been shown to a cupboard about the size of a wardrobe where there were various bones, each with sort of little paper labels or something on them. And I was being told by one of the monks that they didn't even know what some of them were. So they clearly weren't catalogued or listed or whatever else. So that's very interesting. Well, we've got a question from Sean Pilcher. Now, I don't know whether, William, we can unmute Sean Pilcher and he could ask the question himself directly, or else Dr. Jenkins could read it.
Yes, hello.
I don't know.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Fantastic. Do you want to ask the question directly? It might be easier.
Yes, hi, Dr. Jenkins.
You've got an excellent article on devotion to and care of relics, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes. Thanks very much. Yeah. So you mentioned researching the seals of the relics and repairing them and the threads and everything. That's my full-time job is researching relics and authenticating them or preparing them. And I'd like to ask you more about the book you mentioned, prepared by the priest of the Cathedral of Westminster because the tasks you're describing are my daily kind of work, is dividing the relics and sealing them and preparing them for altars and things like that. So I think I would have a lot to learn from this Father Richard, and I didn't catch his surname. So if you could say more about that, and I would love to find out how I could even read through that if that's a possibility. But thanks again for your talk. It's really wonderful to hear someone as excited about relics as I am. So thanks.
Thank you. And I will. I mean, it is one of those things where there are a few of us that are interested, but I mean, I will certainly get in touch with you, because I think there is something that I really want to. I've given a version of this talk at Bar Convent as well, and I've talked to a few people as I go around giving talks around the country at various archivist society and things like that. And I think there is a real desire for there to be more of a joined up thinking about how the few large remaining relic repositories deal with their relics, which are often, these are human remains. They are difficult to conserve, and they're often, in the case of Westminster, left up to like volunteer archivists and a sacristan who doesn't have training in that, or might hopefully have training in that. So it would be lovely to get like a working or at least a network together of people who are thinking about these things in interesting ways, not just osteologists, art historians, conservators, archivists, but also historians thinking about the history of the relics. So I'm very glad that you asked this question. It's not a book. It is more an administrative record. They are entries, so it's in Latin. So it's just sort of sat there really, and no one's. I can, if we contact, I can send you I can send the original, but I can send you the translation as well. Sent out, it's not clear who these people are. Loads of them get sent to this retired museum curator. Why? I don't know. What's he doing? So it's only some of them you can really make sense of. But it's very bare. It is just very, I took this relic, I split it in two, I put one in this, and I put one in the other, and they went to these people. There's no real explanation of why he's doing it. It's just a record of where those relics have gone, and that's it. But I shall definitely get in touch, and I'll let you have a look at it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And as I'm sitting here listening to your wonderful talk about St. John Southworth, I have on my desk here one of those small reliquaries you mentioned that were prepared in the 20th century. So it's a very small world, and thanks very much again.
You're very blessed. Yes, thank you.
Whereabouts are you based, Sean? Sean, whereabouts are you based?
In the United States, as my accent probably
Yes.
betrays. Yeah.
Okay, so will you be coming over to England at all to visit?
Yes, there's talk of my coming over for a conference that might be organized. So actually, it would be good to be in touch about that, because I'll be making a few stops, and it would be good to connect with the people who are interested here.
Okay.
Yes, and if you've not met Jan Graffius as well, so yeah.
Excellent. Do we have any other questions at all? I think
I've seen a few in the there was Susan Eklund asked about whether the cathedral would consider opening up the large collection. So they are in the crypt for relic cupboards, and they are on occasion viewable when the crypt is open. But essentially the collection, a lot of them are so precious that they can't really be. They have also a treasury display, which is, I think, undergoing a little bit of a renovation at the moment. So some of them, but they can only really display a small portion of them at any one time. And again, it is that problem of conservation, as all of them on display. And also a lot of them aren't even much to look at, to be honest. I didn't get on to talking about, they've got a load of those little takers there with like treasury tags attached with like numbers on them. I'm pretty convinced that they've got numbers on because they were loaning them out to patients at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. So they would send them out if you were ill and you wanted a particular saint, you could have this, but it would numbered so that you'd record, oh, it's gone to this patient and it come back. I've been looking for the documentation for that. I can't think of why else you'd have all these numbers on them. They just have so many.
It sounds like a lending library. You sort of borrow one and then return it. And
well, I mean, they're there to do a job. I mean, either they do a job or they sit there doing nothing. And I do think that the idea of, if you've got people in hospital who are desperate for a relic of their patron saint in their hour of need, and you can send them one to borrow for a week or a couple of days or whatever, then that's a fantastic thing to do. I think now the church is much more. I think you might under the 94 law, but you can't give them anymore. But the church is much wary about the misuse of relics than it used to be. Much warier. And of course, after Vatican II, a lot of places just the reason why, as Sean was saying, you've got all these relics, and they're not catalogued, or they're barely catalogued. A lot of places, just the parishes would send their relics to the cathedral because they didn't want them anymore. You know, after Vatican II, they didn't have any need for them, because of the changes in devotional structure. So places that have relics ended up with even more. Too many. Yeah? They have no idea what they got. They just had piles and piles of relics. They don't know what to do with them. So it became a real problem.
It sounds like they need a proper archivist or whatever, somebody to actually catalogue them and actually store them correctly. And because obviously, being human remains, they may disintegrate or whatever. So therefore, they presumably have to be kept in certain conditions. Otherwise, they would just have a pile of dust, probably.
Well, as I say, they're human remains. I mean, they're human remains of saints, but they're human remains. You know, and their human remains go off. They really do.
Yes.
Other one from Peggy. The name of the work of recommending was The Leopard by Lampedusa. Lampedusa. The Leopard. It's a really good book on sort of devotional trends in 19th century Italy, but sort of lightly comic. It's very good.
Are there any other comments or questions in the box, sir? So several people saying, wonderful talk, thank you so much. Wonderful, thank you for your presentation. Thanks very much. I think we're getting a theme here. And Susan says, may the holy saints and martyrs pray for us. There's a question about St. Edmund, I think, relic at Toulouse.
I don't know.
Right.
These things tend to have a tendency to get lost. I genuinely don't know. The problem is also there was a huge amount of disruption in France during the war, and a lot of churn. I can't, off the top of my head, I think I did try and track it down at one point, but it's quite hard to get. It's quite hard to find out where relics are in England, let alone in a country that I can't, access with ease. I mean, I think if there's one of the not English martyrs, the Irish martyr, Blessed Oliver Plunkett. St. Oliver Plunkett now, isn't it? No, I think it's still Blessed Oliver Plunkett. He, when they found his remains, and they were sort of, everyone wanted a piece of Blessed Oliver Plunkett. The bit that went to Paris, no one knows where it is. They went to the Benedictines in Paris and just disappeared. So that does a lot of these relics of St. John Southworth. I'd love to track them down. I know exactly where they went, but a lot of those convents out in the 1970s. A lot of those places don't exist anymore. So where did they go then? Where do they end up? Where do these relics go? I mean, I know that some places the Jesuits decided that it would be better to burn them than to let them fall into the wrong hands. Basically, they've always been a problem.
Interesting. I like the story of Cardinal Vaughan.
But at the same time, they're too holy to just.
Yeah, I like the story about Cardinal Vaughan pinching the relic. I thought that was quite amusing, very medieval, the way that medieval monks would sort of visit another monastery and suddenly leave in a hurry with the relic and sort of, and then they suddenly realize that they've just stolen the prized relic from somewhere else. It's kind of reminiscent of that. But
the story of himself a saint, St. Hugh of Lincoln, when he was Bishop of Lincoln, going to like Vézelay, I think it was in France, and going to kiss the bone of St. Mary Magdalene and taking off, chew a bit of it off with his front teeth and save it to take it back to Lincoln. So it was even saints themselves have stolen saints. So I don't think Cardinal Vaughan thought he was doing anything wrong.
It would make an interesting book, I think, that really. But I think it's probably true to say that relics aren't as popular as they once were in the Catholic Church a few years ago, maybe 30, 40 or more years ago. Would that be correct in saying that, do you think?
Um, it's very difficult to speak now of the church, because it is so. I mean, my mother-in-law's church in Guiseley, I wouldn't think about relics at all, but there's plenty of congregations, St Wilfrid's in York, that would that they'll be at the forefront of their mind, that kind of thing. So it really does sort of depend on your brand, I suppose, now, which is just the way the church has gone. To be honest, in the mid 20th century, relics aren't really. It's a very good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Alana Harris, wrote a book called Faith in the Family, where she did a lot of oral history of Catholicism in England in the 1950s, 60s. And relics don't really come up. The middle class families might have a small collection, like your Patton Walshes and your Beryl Weeks and things like that. And the upper class families would have their own private collections, but they weren't really a part of working class culture, Catholic culture. It's more of a status thing, I think.
I'd associate with recusancy to a certain extent, perhaps after the Reformation period, following that.
And a lot of the recusancy was based around these sort of middle class and upper class families who then would stockpile relics for the use of the community. So sort of carried on from that. And Westminster itself, I should make no bones about it, is built as and built by the Catholic middle classes. This is not a church for the Irish Catholics of London at all. This is a church for people who live on Eaton Square and down Gloucester Road and things like that. This is, and all the subscribers who pay for the building of it are resolutely middle class Catholics, and it always sort of has been that way. It is meant as a sort of English facing church. I mean, now of course it's a far more diverse community, but in the first 40 or 50 years, there's a reason why Westminster ends up with so many relics, and that is to do with the shape of its congregation as well in those early years. That's the kind of family the Cardinal Vaughan comes from as well. Not the kind of Cardinal Vaughan comes from, but.
I think it's fair to say a pilgrimage is becoming more popular, though, even if relics aren't necessarily. But pilgrimage certainly seems to be, per se, very much more popular in the last perhaps 10, 15, 20 years, really, with lots of pilgrimage routes growing up. So perhaps in some ways they could be linked with the relics as well. I know there's lots of people writing about and having projects and books and all sorts of things that are linked with the idea of pilgrimage. So perhaps there could be more connections between the relics and the pilgrimage, and they can be pointed out a bit more. Perhaps that will raise the profile, perhaps, of those.
Well, I mean, it would be lovely to get a pilgrimage from Lancashire, Salisbury, down to Westminster. I know that the Guild of St John Southworth at Westminster Cathedral have worked hard to make those links and do those pilgrimages to Lancashire. So they are working in that direction, which is great. But I think it's a shame that St John isn't better known. And I mean, as I said, you go to Westminster Cathedral, they've got a relic of everybody. If you name your saint, they've got it basically. So yes, it is. And the only pilgrimage I know of that is a pilgrimage to Westminster Cathedral that's ongoing isn't to St John South. It's Cardinal Hume. It's some link with South America. I can't remember which exact country, but there's a regular pilgrimage from South America to Cardinal Hume's tomb in recognition of some mission work he did over there. So I've just noticed one in the chat that I said from James Crowley about whether do I approach cathedrals and churches or do they approach me? I've mainly stuck with Westminster, although, actually in the case of St Chad's Birmingham, when I was there for St Chad's Day, they approached me. I'm quite more than amenable to be approached. I mean, as I say, I'm really sojourning in the modern period because no one else seemed to be working on this kind of thing, and I found it very interesting, and I'd found lots of material. My main thing is Thomas Becket and Canterbury Cathedral in the Middle Ages, so I don't necessarily have the bandwidth to be going out there and looking, but if people come to me, then I will quite happily drop things because I find this so interesting, and also there is an element to which it is to which it is quite a matter of urgency, in that these things are often not being kept properly, or and they are actually deteriorating. And actually, interesting, I've noticed in the chat there that it's been said quite rightly that Cardinal Vaughan left a large and impressive collection of relics to Salford Cathedral. I have been meaning, and if he's watching this, I'm very sorry that I haven't been in touch, to get in touch with the archivist of Salford Cathedral, because, or of the Diocese of Salford, because he wanted to talk about his relic collections, and I think that would be a lovely place to get to grips with those, because there's quite good provenance for a lot of them as well. So I mean, there is something building here. It just it's something like this which hopefully could bring a lot of it together, or at least make it known that there are people out there. But do, and I say this widely, if you want to get in touch with me about this, I will be happy to help, offer advice, whatever, in any capacity. I find this really interesting and really close to home, and very important as well. So I'm more than happy to receive emails. My email's there, john.jenkins@york.ac.uk. Please do email me about relics, or about anything really, you know. But especially about relics would be, yeah, great.
I think I mentioned Downside and their sort of collection a few years ago. That if anybody's interested in Downside, my immediate predecessor, Dr. Simon Johnson, as chairman of the ECHA, is still at Downside and would know more about that. If anybody's interested in Downside, contact him, and we can easily put you in touch with Dr. Johnson, I think. Are there any more questions anybody wants to ask at all, I wonder? As Michelle has mentioned a great book, Patrick Geary, about the medieval relic theft. There's a link to that in the chat if anybody's interested, actually. I would imagine people have written books on the theft of medieval relics, actually, and how they acquired them from various different places.
Yeah, well, Patrick Geary's Furta Sacra is the classic work on that.
Yeah.
And he wrote a few chapters as well elsewhere on things like that. I mean, for relics generally, if you're interested, Cynthia Hahn is the absolute authority on a lot of this. Wrote a recent, about 5 years ago, I had a book with, I think it was Reaction Press, that's really good on relics and the art of reliquary, that goes from the very earliest days, and those sort of bits of stone from the Holy Land, through to relics of Napoleon and things like that. So anything that Cynthia Hahn has written, some really good and very accessible stuff. Well, so that would be the place to go if you're interested in relics.
Yes, yes. How interesting. I think people will have to approach the cathedrals and ask them actually about those things. Actually, I'm up in Manchester from time to time, and I could actually ask about the relics at Salford sometime. I was actually at Liverpool Cathedral on last Sunday, actually, talking to the Archbishop, actually, at a service there. But I didn't think to ask about relics. So it wasn't something I thought about at all. But there's an interesting question to ask about their collection of relics, actually, and what they do with them. I have got a connection with the cathedral there, so I could email them about it, perhaps.
And I mean, Liverpool is one of those. I'd be very interested. I've got no idea what the state of Liverpool's relics are, because it looks like the kind of place that would have them. You know, this is Liverpool almost. James Cody said he didn't invent to read the Salford Cathedral relics. That's excellent. I would love to hear about that. I'd love to hear lots about that. That's brilliant, and it's great. This is the kind of thing. There needs to be some, I think, central connection between places, so that
register,
people know a register, but also so that this is one of the problems that I mean, for all their faults, the Anglican cathedrals do very well, is that they have the Association of English Cathedrals, and they have Cathedrals Plus, and all these various national groups where the cathedrals all talk to each other about best practice, and that doesn't seem to exist for Catholic cathedrals, which have always been slightly their own little world. And there does need to be, I think, some discussion of best practice, of conservation, of I have the feeling, I mean, I'm speaking, I'm not, I always feel a little bit like I don't to speak for the cathedrals themselves. Obviously, you know, they do great work and they have lots of things to do in terms of mission and pastoral care and all those sort of things. And sometimes relic people seem to be embarrassed of their relic collections. They are aware that they're not in the state that they should be. And then the only thing that happens there is they continue to get worse. So there needs to be some sort of frank discussion about what's actually out there. And it's not just the cathedral, it's the old seminaries as well, which are even worse because they had huge collections and now a lot of them are really struggling to exist, if they're existing at all. What happens to them? You know, where do they go? There are almost too many. So yes, that's the issue. And I think that needs to be the big conversation, or one of the big conversations there. And I just need to note in the chat that James Crowley is saying that great efforts are being made to try and address the issues of inventories, which is great. Yeah, but it is that sort of conversation about, and Westminster very recently has been doing this. Miriam Power, they're doing great things in actually securing or better conditions and getting a lot of them working with the University of Liverpool. But again, it's sharing that knowledge as well, sharing that knowledge around that's vital. And I'm just coming in at this, as I say, as a historian. I'm interested in these things not necessarily as objects of material culture, but of what they did, which I think is also the story that's missing. Is that, you know, these things have a history themselves, but you can't start to tell that history until you know what's there. So that's sort of the first step.
Susan Eklund said about a Facebook group where we could have these discussions. Well, we have the English Catholic History Association Facebook group, if anybody's interested. So anybody could post a question or some information or whatever in that group, if anybody's interested. So I think we have, I think, over 4,000 members of that group and different countries in the world as well. So people might be interested. So it's just to sort of flag that up. We have a number of future talks as well. If you look at our website, you'll see that there's a number of talks coming up in the future. We're redeveloping the website as well, and even as we speak, I think. We've got our AGM at Warwick Street in London in November as well, if anybody's interested in coming along, meet the committee, etc. And we'll have some speakers hopefully as well. So we are looking for some speakers for that. If anybody has any suggestions or ideas for speakers, perhaps 2 speakers for our AGM in November, then we'd be very interested to hear from you. So that would be good. It could be on relics, it could be on all sorts of things, really. But obviously it has to be in person. So if anybody knows anybody, that would be fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins, for your fantastic and illuminating talk this evening. I found it very interesting. I think the bit about St. Cuthbert's coffin I thought was quite interesting, because I've seen, like many people have, Durham Cathedral. I wonder whether there were other bits of it they chipped off and sent to different places. It sounds a bit sacrilegious, really, and destruction of historic artifacts. Really, that's, you know, makes me cringe a bit when you think of people chopping bits off things and sending them to other places. But no, it's really a really interesting talk and fascinating. I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and I hope you join us again for some more talks in the future. So thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins. It will be recorded. It has been recorded, and it will be on the on YouTube as well before long.
Oh, can I just say, yes, I beg your pardon. Just a brief mention for the Friends of Westminster Cathedral, who helped to promote this talk. They undertake a variety of fundraising activities, social events and excursions in aid of the work of Westminster Cathedral. And so thank you to them for having spread the word about this talk. And it's nice to see so many people here.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, William. And thank you, everybody. And thank you for attending the talk this evening. So I will say goodbye, and we'll see you again before too long, hopefully. Bye-bye.